I was told that you also have been very involved in the fire department in Selkirk. Can you talk a little bit about your involvement with that?
76 years I was
Wow.
in. Still a,
That's got to be some kind of record.
well, there's my coat.
How has the fire department changed, and what's your involvement been?
Well, when I was probably 10, 11, 12 years old, Selkirk had the old child's fire truck with white wall tires, and every time they go out on a fire, oh, I gotta be a fireman. I gotta be a fireman. So when I was 18, I joined. And right now I'm 92, so you can see how many years I was there. But I ended up, I was a commissioner for 15 years. I was chairman of the board. That was my life then.
Mm-hmm.
That was my life.
How has volunteer firefighting changed in those years?
The equipment now.
Yeah.
Equipment. And, well, they do a good job.
Yeah.
It's the equipment more than anything. And now, though, it's hard to get volunteers. They used to be, every time somebody moved in town, we talked to them and they joined. But today, they just have better things to do, I guess.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mike, I'm always, we have all of this technology now. Just a couple of years ago, I had a lawn tractor that caught on fire right in my front yard. I had a gas leak. And I just got on my cell phone and I called Ellesmere Fire Department. They were there in like 2 minutes, right? But in a more rural area, in that older era, how did someone call in a fire? Did Selkirk have the old fire boxes that were mounted on like concrete rebarred posts, and you would
well,
pull it?
they had one big ring bell, and they'd hit it with a sledgehammer, and it would ring all through town.
That's at the station. That's at the department, at
Right.
the station. But how did like a resident call a fire in? Like how like
well, they
was
had
it?
phones back then, but
Oh, okay. So they just
you'd have, I don't know, 4 or 5 people on the line, you know,
the party
party
lights.
line.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then they had the system was back then. Every fireman had at home the streets and all, and it would, if a fire would say it was in Bliss's Corners, it would, that's the siren they had at the YMCA. They would activate our siren, and it was 2 short, 1 long. You look at your chart, 2 short. Oh, Beaver Dam Road.
Oh,
So you go now, you jump in a truck and you go to Beaver Dam Road,
Yeah.
and that's the only way you knew.
Can you talk about any businesses that were in Selkirk that were active, that might not be there anymore?
Yeah, there's 12 businesses that are not there anymore. 12 bars within 3 miles of Selkirk. 3-mile area, there were 12 bars back in
Wow.
those days. With the 5-cent beer, 10-cent beer.
Now, was that a lot of people that worked in the rail yards that would just go to these bars, or just pretty
Well,
much
a lot of people from the rail yards, because of the YMCA there, they had 2 bars across the street from each other from the YMCA that they could walk to.
Okay.
But most of them, you would have to drive, but you wouldn't have to drive too far. They were all over the place.
12 different bars.
In fact, my father ran a tavern in that house. It was so big. Well, he had a tavern going there, but it wasn't a money-making thing. He was more or less a hobby with him.
Now, you mentioned the YMCA. Would that have been like a place where young men would stay and they would work?
Railroad. It was a railroad YMCA,
Okay.
but I was a Boy Scout, and we go down to the rifle range. That's where we learned how to shoot.
Uh-huh.
But the public was welcome, like with their restaurant or something. But it was mostly railroad.
Okay.
It was mostly all railroad.
So young men would come in and they would board at the YMCA and live there, and then work at the rail yards and other places too. Okay.
Yeah. there was 2 houses in Selkirk, they're still there. In fact, I'm probably 12, 13 years old, and they moved the one house. It was a railroad house. When the crews come in, they would stay in that house until they got the train back to Boston or wherever they were going. And I remember one day, okay, and they jacked the thing up. They jacked that house up. It's on Thatcher Street. And they put logs under it, and the horses, they moved. And I'm sitting there, how the hell moved, how are they moving the house?
Yeah.
They moved it across the street. The house is still there.
Wow.
Did they do it with like horses or just pull it with a truck?
Pulled it with horses.
Well, I don't know how they jack it up, but I don't know how they reinforce it. And then they hook up the horses to it and pull it.
Pull it on logs.
But I was on logs underneath it. So. In fact, there's 2 houses like that moved in Selkirk.
Other than the taverns and the bars, which are no longer there, were there any other businesses that you remember from your youth? That you mentioned something about.
Yeah,
Go
we
ahead.
had 2 grocery stores.
Mm-hmm.
And one was really small. Well, they were both really small, but that's the only businesses right in Selkirk.
Okay. You mentioned.
Well, it's other than Security Supply. That was a big thing.
How long was that? That was around from when you were a child, right? Security
yeah.
Supply.
There was an apartment house I owned later. It's where they started. The plumber started in that house.
Yeah.
And they moved it, and Bill Bennett back then wanted to get rid of it, so I bought it from him, made 2 apartments, fixed them, and then I ended up selling it too. But Security Supply was the only real business there.
Okay. Did that employ people from Selkirk?
Oh, yeah.
As well? Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned something in the earlier conversation that you'd had with Susan Leith about molding sand. That was something that was kind of a big business.
Molding said there was, if I can remember correctly, there was 5 companies. Mike Miller, molding, Selkirk Molding. I worked for him. They had I was 16 years old. They were a stub-nosed 6-cylinder truck. So I ended up, he hired me, and I worked a whole summer with him, hauling sand. But Fraley's was on Beaver Dam Road, Bloodgood. There was 5, but that was a big deal back in there.
So these would be molding sand so that you would pour like molten steel and things like that into. Yeah.
Yeah.
Into,
And I can
guess.
remember Mike Miller, he'd go out looking for a new sand, and I'd go out with him, and he'd get there and he'd grab some dirt, and if it stuck, that's molding. And then he'd load it up and load it in the trucks, and away you go.
Wow.
Put it in the rail car.